So, here's a thought to kick us off. Could our constant focus on toxic masculinity, defining it, critiquing it,
Mm.
could that actually be what keeps it alive? Are we fighting a shadow that we're, in a way, helping to define?
That's a really provocative way to put it. It is a paradox, isn't it?
Right.
When you constantly highlight something, even negatively, you give it attention, maybe even a certain forbidden appeal.
Right. Makes you question if just opposing something head on is always the best way.
Exactly.
Okay, let's try a little thought experiment. Picture this: a world where, overnight, all men perfectly embody every single feminist ideal. Total emotional openness, equal domestic work, unwavering allies. Sounds like utopia, right?
On the surface, maybe.
But what if? What if that absolute compliance created a new kind of problem? A sort of hollowness, like some vital energy got stamped out.
Well, history does show us that revolutions, even with the best intentions, can sometimes create new constraints.
Hmm.
Nietzsche warned about becoming the monster you fight.
Mhm.
So this idea of the perfect man, it raises really deep questions about, well, human nature and unintended consequences, even when you're aiming for something truly noble.
I absolutely believe in equal emotional labor. I
Mhm.
talk about it, advocate for it. But honestly, recently a male friend was really breaking down, genuinely upset about work stuff. And my first gut reaction, it wasn't pure empathy.
Right.
There was this flicker, this shameful thought, is this real? Or is he just like performing vulnerability? My brain knew one thing, but my gut felt uncomfortable. It was a real clash.
Wow. That kind of internal conflict really says a lot, doesn't it, about how deep these old norms run, even when we consciously reject them.
Totally.
Our intellect gets it, but the emotional programming is still there running in the background.
Yeah.
What does that dissonance really tell us about the challenge here, the real challenge of redefining what it means to be a man?
We say we want men to be vulnerable, we champion it. But when a man actually is vulnerable, when that mask slips and you see the raw emotion underneath,
Mhm.
how often is the reaction pure support versus that subtle feeling, maybe unconscious, that he's being weak?
There's definitely a tension, a big one, between the ideal, we talk about this emotionally fluent man, and centuries of culture saying vulnerability equals weakness. It's like asking someone to tear down a fortress they were raised to believe was their only safety.
And this isn't just theory, right? This plays out constantly. Think about online when you see those blanket statements like, all men are trash.
Oh, yeah. Everywhere.
Do people pause? Do they think about the pain maybe driving that? Or is it just instant outrage? Click, share, amplify, that whole addictive cycle.
Well, social media is kind of built for that, isn't it? The quick hit, the strong emotion. Nuance doesn't really get the same traction.
Yeah, it gets drowned out.
And that really shapes how we even try to talk about these massive, complicated issues.
So could this intense push for female empowerment, as vital as it is, have an unintended side effect? Could it be creating men who are so terrified of messing up, so trained in saying the right things?
That they become passive.
Exactly. Passive indecisive. The exact kind of beta male that some feminist voices then turn around and criticize. Are we accidentally creating the very thing we say we dislike?
Psychologically, yeah, that can happen. If you live in constant fear of judgment, you might just stop trying. Initiative fades, self-belief gets eroded. It makes you ask, can social movements sometimes overcorrect,
Yeah.
create new problems?
I saw this happen. A well-known feminist influencer just tore into a guy online for like a slightly awkward compliment, total public shaming.
Ah,
But then later I heard her privately making fun of her own boyfriend. Why? Because he was too needy, too sensitive. The difference was jarring. Which version was real? The public takedown or the private mockery?
that really exposes that gap, doesn't it? Between the
Ooh.
ideals we preach and how we actually live. The pressure to maintain a certain image can lead to these huge inconsistencies,
Yeah.
makes you question what's genuine conviction and what's just performance.
So what is the actual goal here? Is it genuine equality where men feel okay exploring all of who they are, flaws and all? Or is there maybe a little bit of, I don't know, satisfaction in having the power to define what's wrong with men, a kind of subtle authority we enjoy wielding?
That cuts right to the heart of power dynamics, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Even in movements for good, there's always that potential for the in-group to want to keep control, to keep defining the terms. It's like Socrates told us to constantly examine our own motives, right?
Right, because you hear slogans like, the future is female, it sounds empowering. But what if that future is built on this foundation of resentment, these sweeping condemnations,
Mhm.
and it ends up filled with men who are either totally shut down emotionally from all the criticism or just silently furious? That's not progress. That sounds like just more conflict down the line.
History is pretty clear on this. Dehumanizing any group, painting them with one brush, it rarely leads anywhere good. It just entrenches division, makes any real moving forward impossible. That vision of the future is, well, it's a warning.
Look, think about prohibition in the U.S. Noble goal, right?
Yeah.
Get rid of the problems caused by alcohol.
Yeah, seemed logical.
But what actually happened? Organized crime boomed, and making alcohol forbidden just made it seem more exciting, more appealing.
The forbidden fruit effect.
Exactly. Could some of the more absolute, uncompromising feminist stances be doing something similar? Accidentally making old school, maybe even problematic masculinity seem more attractive simply because it feels like a rebellion against the rules.
That's a fascinating parallel. It really shows how trying to just suppress something complex often backfires. That allure of the forbidden is a really powerful psychological force.
So take a moment, think about the last time you mentally criticized a man based on some feminist idea. In that split second, were you really seeing him, an individual person with his own background, his own issues?
Or just a symbol.
Yeah. Or was he just a stand-in for the patriarchy, a convenient target for your pushback? What did you actually see in that moment?
It requires some serious self-reflection, doesn't it? Are we engaging with people or just filtering everything through our ideological checklists?
Yeah.
Real empathy means seeing past the labels.
We say men need to shed their toxic traits. Okay, fair enough. But how much of what we're calling the new ideal for men is really just our own specific list of demands, how we think they should be?
Rather than what might actually be authentic for them.
Precisely. Not necessarily what fits with their own journey, their own way of figuring things out.
It raises that fundamental issue, Can any ideology, even one aiming for liberation, end up imposing its own set of rules? Real growth often means finding your own path, and that path might not always look how others expect it to.
Okay, here's a really tough thought experiment. Imagine you're raising a son. Would you prefer him to be perfectly feminist approved? Ticks all the boxes, says all the right things, constantly aware of his privilege, but inside he feels empty, disconnected? Or would you prefer a friend who's maybe kinder, confident, but perhaps a bit rough around the edges in ways that don't perfectly align with the feminist ideal and risk him being labeled problematic? Which of those futures feels worse?
That choice really forces you to confront the potential clash between ideological purity and just human well-being. It's that tricky balance between wanting social progress and needing individual authenticity.
Yeah.
Where do you draw the line?
Look at any online gender debate. You see some voices expressing real, raw pain. They're demanding change, accountability.
Yeah, absolutely. That's valid.
But then there are others. It feels like they're just chasing that little buzz of outrage, sharing the most extreme takes, fanning the flames. Which one actually helps dismantle bad systems, and which one is just feeding the anger machine?
And the platforms themselves often reward that outrage, right?
Yeah.
The algorithms push the most emotionally charged stuff, not necessarily the most thoughtful or constructive dialogue. You have to wonder about the real motives sometimes.
We want men to be sensitive, but also strong. Providers, but not, dominant. Vocal, but stick to the script we approve. Assertive, but never cross the line into aggressive. Passionate, but hold back so you're not intimidating.
It's an impossible list.
It really is. It's like walking this incredibly narrow tightrope. Is it any surprise that a lot of men seem kind of frozen, just terrified of putting a foot wrong?
Those conflicting signals, the constantly shifting goalposts, it creates massive confusion and anxiety. If you don't have clear, consistent expectations, how can you possibly meet them? It feels like being set up to fail.
I have to admit something. I talk a lot about wanting men to be emotionally intelligent. But recently I was on a date, and the guy opened up about feeling insecure about his career path. And this little voice inside me went, not ambitious enough.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, my own internal contradiction just smacked me in the face. Have you ever had a moment like that, where your stated beliefs and your gut reaction just don't line up?
Absolutely. I think we all do, if you're honest. It shows that gap again between the conscious ideals and the deeper unconscious biases we've all absorbed. Recognizing those inconsistencies in ourselves is, well, it's step one, isn't it? Towards maybe having more genuine empathy.
I was talking to a young man recently, and he sounded so defeated. He said, basically, I try. I try to be open, sensitive, listen more, all the things they say they want.
Okay.
But then, he said, I see the same women who talk about that still going for the super confident, maybe even kind of arrogant guys who don't seem to care about any of it. It feels like a game I can never win.
Out. That's really poignant. It points to that potential disconnect, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Between what people say they value and what actually, maybe unconsciously drives their attraction or choices. Are the stated preferences always the real ones?
And maybe here's a truth that isn't very popular. Perhaps men aren't evolving in the way some feminists want because the definition of evolved keeps changing. It's a moving target.
Hmm.
Maybe sincere efforts feel pointless when you can't even clearly see the destination you're supposed to be aiming for. Why keep trying if the rules constantly shift?
Clear communication is just fundamental for any real change. If the expectations are fuzzy or contradictory or always in flux, it just breeds frustration, confusion, maybe even resentment among those being asked to change.
And you see this disconnect in dating too, right? The profile might talk about feminist theory, wanting an equal partner.
But the filters are set for height, income, someone who takes charge.
Exactly. The theory is radical, but the preferences look pretty traditional. That dissonance, it's loud.
It really highlights that tension between our intellectual commitments and the deeply embedded cultural scripts that still shape our desires, even in our most personal lives.
Okay, be brutally honest with yourself, listener. You've probably called out men for mansplaining. Fair enough. But have you ever found yourself themsplaining? Explaining a man's own feelings back to him convinced your feminist reading gave you the definitive insight.
Oh.
That ego, man, it can hide inside the most well-meaning ideologies.
That's a crucial check-in, isn't it? On our own communication. Are we having a real dialogue back and forth? Or were we sometimes just replicating those same patterns of dominance, just wrapped in a different flag?
I know someone, a really committed feminist, who always insisted on believe women, like as an absolute rule,
Okay, common stance.
until her own brother was accused of something. And suddenly, nuance entered the picture. Suddenly, context mattered. Suddenly, well, people can lie sometimes. Whose truth gets to be conditional? And who decides when the conditions apply?
That's such a stark example of how hard it is to apply abstract rules to messy personal realities. Our deepest beliefs can get tested, even shifted, when it hits close to home.
Mhm.
It really questions how universal or consistent these principles can be in practice.
Now, flip the script entirely. Imagine you're a man hearing the constant message, men are the problem. Masculinity is toxic, day in, day out. Does that feel like an inspiring call to be better? Or does it feel like this inescapable collective blame? Like you're constantly under suspicion just for existing? In that scenario, is the feminist voice the sound of progress, or does it start to sound like a new kind of pervasive judgment?
That empathy exercise, trying to genuinely see it from the other side, is so important. It's the only way to really grasp the potential impact of our words, our critiques.
You say you want men to change, to be better, but is the desire truly for their authentic growth, even if that growth looks different from what you expected?
Or is it more about wanting them to change to versions that make you feel more comfortable, more in control, perhaps?
Yeah, which is it?
That really covers the underlying motivation, doesn't it?
Oh.
Is the goal mutual flourishing, everyone getting liberated? Or is it, maybe unconsciously, about shifting the power balance primarily in one direction?
History shows pretty clearly. If you constantly tell a whole group of people they're fundamentally flawed.
The reaction isn't always, oh, okay, I'll change.
Right. Often it's withdrawal, disengagement, deep, simmering resentment. Are we starting to see signs of that now?
That historical perspective is a powerful reminder. Just hammering negativity at a group can have really significant, often damaging social effects. Dialogue and understanding usually work better than just broad condemnation.
Okay, here's the really uncomfortable twist. The idea you might instinctively want to reject. Could some influential parts of feminism today be less about actually liberating men?
And more about
More about subtly domesticating them, making them less threatening, less competitive. And could that process, ironically, be breeding the very passivity that then gets criticized?
that's a deeply provocative thought. It challenges some core assumptions. It forces us to look at those potential unintended power dynamics, the complex ways even good intentions can ripple outwards unexpectedly.
What if all the feminist guidance, the scripts for how to apologize correctly, the demands for visible allyship, what if it's not actually fostering real growth?
But just conditioning compliance.
Yeah. Compliance driven by the fear of being called out, of being canceled, of social exclusion.
That brings up the difference between genuine transformation, which comes from within, and just following rules because you're scared of the consequences. Real growth usually needs internal motivation, not just external pressure.
So sit with this question for a second. In this whole big story about gender, are you, without a doubt, the enlightened guide, leading men towards betterment?
Or,
Or are you maybe, just possibly, another voice insisting the story be told your way with you holding the pen?
oof. That's a moment for some deep self-reflection for anyone involved in these conversations, examining our own position, our own potential biases, shaping how we see things, how we speak.
Feminism started in large part to break chains for women. But what if some versions of it today are unintentionally forging new chains? Chains for men,
Chains made of what?
made of impossible expectations, shifting goalposts, a constant sense of not being good enough, and in doing that, creating the very pushback, the antagonism it claims to be fighting against.
That metaphor really captures the core paradox we've been exploring. It's a powerful reminder that even the best movements need constant self-critique, need to examine their own assumptions, their potential blind spots. Otherwise, you risk unintended harm.
Remember earlier I asked about that perfect man you might secretly want. How many men who get publicly slammed for toxic traits actually have some of those qualities you might privately admire? Decisiveness, maybe ambition, confidence, if only they just play by your specific set of rules?
It forces us to confront those unspoken criteria we use, doesn't it? Our public statements versus our private feelings, how much our judgment is tangled up in conscious ideals versus unconscious desires.
If these questions are making your feminist certainties wobble even a little bit, I think that's actually a good thing. Share this deep dive. Share it with someone who isn't afraid to ask. Are we sometimes part of the problem we're trying to fix?
Because having those tough conversations, challenging our own sacred cows, that's where real growth happens. Sharing uncomfortable ideas can actually spark change.
What if the support being offered to men isn't really about helping them find their own healthy way of being male? What if it's a subtle pressure campaign to surrender to a pre-approved, maybe more feminized ideal?
It really highlights the need for agency, for self-direction in anyone's growth. True empowerment means finding your own way, not just fitting into someone else's mold.
You say you want a sensitive man. Okay. But when he shows too much sensitivity, according to some internal gauge, does a part of you pull back? Is that your own conditioning bumping up against your stated feminist beliefs?
It reveals how complex and messy human attraction is, how those deeply ingrained cultural messages can still clash with the ideals we consciously hold.
Sometimes it feels like men are treated like faulty software, like we can just debug them with the right ideological framework.
Yeah, apply the patch and fix the bug.
But people aren't code.
No.
If you treat their experiences as just errors in your theory, the whole system of connection might just crash from the sheer frustration.
That analogy really points out the limits of trying to engineer human behavior. You need empathy, connection, acknowledging complexity. Just trying to fix flaws often misses the mark entirely.
Think about those tiny interactions. The subtle eye roll when a man asks a clumsy question about gender dynamics. In those little moments, who's actually building a bridge? And who might be setting fire to one without even realizing it?
Those micro-interactions, they add up. Dismissiveness shuts down conversation, reinforces divides. It hinders any real progress.
Try this just for yourself. A private inventory. List the male traits you publicly criticize. Then list the ones you might, if you're really honest, secretly admire or find attractive. Where does the truth about your own desires actually lie?
That kind of radical self-honesty can be revealing. It can expose those hidden complexities, the biases, the contradictions we might not even be aware of.
What about the super woke, always agreeable, always deferential man? Is he genuinely evolved? A true ally?
Or maybe just an echo.
Right, just echoing feminist ideas back, maybe without a strong sense of his own authentic self.
It makes you think about the difference between real internal change and just performing compliance. True allyship probably involves thinking for yourself, engaging critically, sometimes even respectfully challenging, not just nodding along.
When a man feels his core sense of masculinity is under constant attack, it can feel like his very being is being invalidated, erased. That's not constructive criticism. That can feel like psychic death.
That's a really powerful way to put it. It highlights the deep connection between identity and well-being and how damaging constant generalized negativity can be to someone's basic sense of self-worth.
We demand absolute perfection from men, scrutinize every word. But do we apply that same level of scrutiny to feminism itself, to its potential flaws, its own moments of misdirected anger? Does focusing so hard on their accountability make us blind to our own?
That calls for real reflexivity, doesn't it, within any movement? Just as we hold others accountable, we have to be willing to look critically at ourselves, our assumptions, our biases, our potential for causing unintended harm.
Ask yourself this honestly. Would you actually want to date the meticulously crafted new man that some feminist ideals seem to be designing?
That's the ultimate personal litmus test, isn't it?
Mm.
Does the theory hold up in the messy reality of your own life, your own desires, your own relationships?
You don't actually have to hate men to end up reinforcing the very stereotypes you claim to despise.
How so?
Just keep relentlessly criticizing their natural impulses, their ways of being, until they learn to suppress them out of anxiety. Just critique them into anxious compliance.
Ah, so it's about the subtle pressure, the constant judgment shaping behavior, even unintentionally reinforcing the patterns you want to break. Change needs more than just critique. It needs space for authentic development.
And who ultimately gets to decide what good masculinity even looks like? Are the people setting those standards completely free of their own biases, their own past traumas? Power, even ideological power, can corrupt.
That's a crucial warning. We have to question all sources of authority, stay alert to bias, even within movements we support. Defining virtue shouldn't be a monopoly held by any single group.
I've definitely seen toxic masculinity used less like a tool for understanding and healing and more like a club
Mm-hmm.
for punishment. It stopped being about progress and started feeling like it was about power. That's troubling.
That really taps into a major concern: how even useful concepts can get twisted, weaponized. The focus shifts from constructive change to just asserting dominance.
Carl Jung talked about the shadow, the parts of ourselves we repress and then project onto others. Could some of the really fierce attacks on certain male traits be partly feminism projecting its own unacknowledged desire for those things? Power, maybe assertiveness, even self-interest? What shadows are being cast here?
Bringing in that Jungian idea is powerful. It's just our strongest criticisms might actually tell us something about ourselves, about what we're not owning within our own psyche. It really calls for deeper introspection.
Here's a slightly terrifying thought. What if men do change? What if they transform exactly according to every feminist demand, and the world still isn't some kind of utopia? Who gets the blame then?
Wow. That question really forces us to admit that societal problems are complex. It's rarely just one group's fault. Real progress probably means tackling a whole web of issues, not just fixing men.
And what about the guys who just nod along, who agree with feminist points not out of conviction but out of fear? Fear of being attacked, fear of social consequences. Is that real agreement? Real change?
Or is it coerced compliance?
Exactly.
That raises huge ethical questions about power dynamics, even in conversation. Can fear undermine genuine consent, genuine transformation? Absolutely.
Is there even one single definition of a good man that could possibly satisfy all the different, sometimes contradictory groups within feminism? Or is chasing that rigid ideal just setting men up for failure, for psychic repression, for feeling totally inauthentic?
It points to the diversity within feminism itself and the danger of creating this impossible, maybe even oppressive, standard for men, one that ignores individuality and authentic self-expression.
Think about the men actually hearing this constant critique. Does it land as helpful feedback? A call to be better?
Or does it just become background noise?
Yeah.
Judgmental static that just chips away at your self-worth over time.
Yeah.
It really matters how the message is received, right? Even good intentions can backfire if the tone is relentlessly critical, unforgiving, and never acknowledges any effort or positive aspects.
It feels like the choice for men today is often either conform to this shifting list of feminist-approved behaviors, even if it feels fake, or try to be authentic, including the parts that might get labeled problematic. Which way leads to a person actually thriving? And honestly, which one do people secretly respect more?
That's the core tension, isn't it? Between external pressure and internal integrity. The long-term outcome for the individual and for society really depends on which value wins out.
Does feminism, as it seeks a better world, need to look inward? Confront its own potential for enjoying the power that comes with defining what's toxic in men?
That call for self-reflection within the movement is vital. Recognizing the power dynamics inherent in defining and critiquing is crucial. If you critique abuses of power, you have to be vigilant about your own potential to wield it unchecked.
Imagine your own son. He shows some classic boy traits, strong-willed, competitive, maybe not always spilling his guts emotionally. Is your first instinct to pathologize that through a feminist lens?
Or to understand it,
Yeah.
guide it.
Right. And what's the cost of either approach to his sense of who he is?
That hypothetical really brings it home. How do we navigate our ideologies within our most personal relationships? Balancing societal ideals with unconditional love and acceptance for the individual in front of us. The well-being of the person has to come first.
And staying silent when you hear those sweeping generalizations about men, the ones that just feel intuitively wrong,
Hmm.
that silence isn't neutral. It's a quiet vote for the echo chamber, even if your gut disagrees.
Absolutely. We need a culture where it's okay to question, to think critically, to respectfully disagree, even when it goes against the prevailing narrative. Real dialogue needs that space.
Fast forward, future generations look back at us. They see a lot of men who seem withdrawn, passive, maybe resentful, and they ask, what were you all focused on? What do we say? Well, we were winning arguments online. We were perfecting our rhetoric.
That future perspective is sobering. It's a powerful push to prioritize actual progress, real understanding, empathy over just performative conflict. What legacy are we actually building?
Maybe truly effective feminism, the kind that builds a genuinely better, more equitable world, needs a bit more humility, a willingness to question our own grand plans to fix men, an acknowledgement that sometimes our best efforts might have unintended negative consequences.
That really emphasizes a more nuanced, self-aware approach, recognizing our own limits, being open to the idea that interventions can backfire. That's key for making real, sustainable progress.
I'll confess, I used to be much quicker with harsh judgments of men, seen purely through that feminist lens. It took me a while to really see the impact of that judgment, the weight it carried. It's something I'm still working on.
Sharing that vulnerability is important. It underlines the human side of all this. We all have biases, we all misjudge. Growth starts with that kind of honest self-assessment.
Look, we don't have a perfect map for navigating this incredibly complex gender landscape. Admitting we don't have all the answers, might be the first really brave step.
Absolutely. Rejecting easy answers, embracing the complexity, that's what fosters honest conversation. Progress comes from grappling with the messiness, not pretending we have a neat formula.
So, back to the start. Are feminists inadvertently creating the kind of men they say they despise? I suspect the answer isn't simple, but it lives in our everyday interactions, our unchecked biases, those subtle power plays, and maybe sometimes prioritizing ideology over actual human connection.
It's a nuanced conclusion, not about blame, but about recognizing the complex interplay of individual actions, motives, and the choices we make every day.
Men aren't just toxic moments or woke performances. There's a fundamental human struggle there, often unseen in the broad strokes. It deserves attention, maybe some empathy.
That call for a more holistic view is crucial. Seeing the full person, acknowledging their complexities beyond the easy labels, that's essential for any real connection or progress.
This deep dive wasn't meant as an attack on feminism. Think of it more as an invitation for all of us to look deeper, maybe look inward. That monster we think we're fighting out there. Sometimes it might just be reflecting something unacknowledged inside ourselves. Maybe listen again with that thought in mind.
Reframing it as introspection, yeah. Encouraging that deeper dive. Real understanding often needs us to revisit things, consider different angles, and be willing to look at our own part.
If this challenged you, if it made you uncomfortable with some certainties, share it. Especially share it with people who have very fixed ideas about feminism and men. Let's start the conversations that are difficult but might actually lead somewhere transformative.
That final push for dialogue is key. Engaging with challenging perspectives, stepping outside our bubbles, that's where meaningful change often begins.
Popelle isn't here to give you easy answers. We're just daring you to consider the uncomfortable possibility. Even the best intentions can cast long, unintended shadows. Question everything, and maybe start by questioning your own certainty.